The archaeologists, while conducting excavations, unexpectedly activated an ancient mechanism that triggered a chain reaction of catastrophic events leading to the start of the apocalypse. At the beginning of the film, a man is hosting a live radio broadcast. The studio walls are decorated with photos of the moon where they supposedly discovered the head of a robot, pictures of the Stonehenge stones, and a newspaper clipping about the Mayan prophecies in Maine. Deep underground, a group of scientists is conducting an excavation. While exploring caves, they find an ancient door for which they have a key. As soon as they take the key out of its box, it seems to magnetically attach itself to the door and triggers a powerful electromagnetic pulse. Meanwhile, in England, tourists arrive at Stonehenge. The guide is telling them about the history of the site when suddenly an earthquake strikes and the central stone begins to glow. One by one, the other stones start to move. Terrified, the tourists panic as they watch the unfolding events. A moment later, lightning bolts shoot out from the columns and strike the central altar. In horror, the people try to, but they don't make it. In time, a blinding flash radiates outward, leaving nothing but piles of ash where the people once stood. Dr. Jacob Glazer is hosting his radio show. He mentions that he discovered an anomaly today, an incredibly powerful electromagnetic surge in the US energy grid which traveled from Maine to England. He doesn't know what it is, and as usual, government scientists are staying silent during the broadcast. A listener calls in to say that Stonehenge has shifted, but Jacob dismisses the claim as nonsense and hangs up. However, another person calls in to confirm the story, seeming to have seen it happen with his own eyes. The area has been cordoned off by the military and no one is allowed near. Intrigued, Jacob decides to investigate the matter himself. As he prepares to leave, Jacob tries to call his friend Dr. Joseph. When Joseph finally answers, Jacob tells him about Stonehenge and suggests they go to England together. However, Joseph refuses, citing his busy schedule. Resigned to his friend's refusal, Jacob heads to the airport alone. Meanwhile, British authorities set up an emergency command center in an elementary school near Stonehenge. Dr. John Turrisdale arrives and meets with other scientists, Dr. Casey and radio physicist Mara. Report strange radio waves passing through the Stonehenge stone, seemingly coming from the ground. Geophysicist David then joins the conversation, uncertain whether there will be more such surges, but agrees that what happens seems like an anomaly. They've already scanned the central stone and it turns out that there is an electromagnetic field inside it. After listening to his colleagues, John states that they need to figure this out as soon as possible. The Russians are already accusing them of nuclear testing. Meanwhile, Jacob arrives at the command center. Seeing the military, he realizes they won't let him through, so he hides among the trees. At night, he sneaks towards Stonehenge where Leeds and her team are conducting research. She collects a soil sample and notices that the color of the ground has changed. A moment later, she sees that the central stone has started to glow. Jacob, now close enough, uses his device and notices that the electromagnetic effect has intensified significantly. Realizing the potential danger, he shouts to the scientist to leave. John and Mara, watching from a distance, also come to the same conclusion and order the team to evacuate immediately. At that moment, the stones begin to move and lightning bolts start shooting from them. The people manage to run and take cover behind a car, but one of the team members hesitates and almost vanishes into thin air. At the same time, in Mexico, on the Yucatan Peninsula, a pyramid starts to move and then explodes. Trying to understand what's happening, the scientists examine various data. Dr. Casey receives a call informing her that immediately after the flash at Stonehenge, the pyramid in Mexico exploded, completely destroying the country. She informs JN, who is skeptical but acknowledges that the events may be connected. However, he insists they focus on what's happening in England rather than somewhere far off. Meanwhile, in Maine, Joseph is studying a map and tells his assistant that they are almost at their destination. He asks her to locate the sun chamber. Jacob decides to examine the stones again, but this time in daylight. He is quickly spotted by security cameras. As he approaches, he notices the strange color of the soil, and when he scans the stone, he detects a strange object inside. However, before he can investigate further, the military arrives and arrests him. Meanwhile, David and Casey discover micro in the soil samples. They immediately report this to JN, who is just as surprised. Such microbes typically appear in soil after a volcanic eruption. Casey believes it may be the beginning of new life. Their conversation is interrupted when they are urgently summoned to the command center. The military brings Jacob to the command center and locks him in a cell. Jacob protests, claiming he is a scientist and can help, but they refuse to listen. When the doctors approach Mara, she informs them that she has found short segments within the radio waves. They are shortening, creating the impression that the waves are cyclical. Intrigued, John asks her to analyze the latest fragment. Mara agrees and uploads the data into the program. As the analysis concludes, a timer appears on the monitor. 37 hours. They realize it's a countdown and they have just over a day to figure out what happens next. Their thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of a major who brings the documents Jacob had. John doesn't want to waste time on it, but David is intrigued. After reviewing them, he shows the others. Leeds immediately notices that it's a map with various parts of the earth connected by lines. The scientist asks who the arrested person is and learns it's Jacob Glazer. John looks down on him despite his past as the youngest ever recipient of the Pritch Prize in astrophysics and doesn't see the point of wasting time on him. However, the others insist on speaking with Jacob. Reluctantly, John agrees. Jacob is brought into the gym. Casey asks him about the map and he explains that these are electromagnetic flows crossing each other underground. The intersection points are concentration points. Each of them is located where ancient civilization structures can be found. Such structures exist at every point except in Maine. However, he assured that a structure exists there too, it just hasn't been discovered yet. He then asks Leeds why the ground changed color, pointing out that it usually signifies the emergence of bacteria. He also mentioned seeing strange electromagnetic radiation inside the stone, similar to what he saw in another location. He believes this is the key to solving the mystery and he can show them everything if they provide him with a computer. Casey ends the conversation with him and returns to the operations center. At the center, John begins a new investigation into the anomaly. They attach a radar to a helicopter and send it over Stonehenge. However, they get no results. Suddenly, lightning bolts erupt from the stones and destroy the helicopter and radar. Right after this, General Foro arrives at the base. He's displeased that the stones destroyed his helicopter and pilot. John explains what they know about the situation and the general suggests simply blowing it up. John argues that they need to study it carefully, but the military man disagrees and gives the order soldiers immediately start planting explosives. However, when the explosion occurs, Stonehenge absorbs it without a trace. The sight shocks both the scientists and the military, realizing they don't know what to do next. Casey suggests bringing Jacob in. Meanwhile, Joseph and his team find the necessary room with the altar stone. They scan it and find a symbol that matches the one in a scroll. From the scroll, they learn that this is the source needed to supply energy to the stone, the primordial hill, and the device in the photo is the key. Jacob is brought back to the center and given access to a computer. He finds a photo of an ancient launch mechanism discovered at the bottom of the The mechanism is currently in an American archaeological fund in New York. By comparing the photos of Stonehenge of stone in the ancient mechanism, Jacob declares that this is the key. However, no one takes him seriously. Lee and Jacob is once again locked in an improvised prison. As soon as he's taken away, the stones of Stonehenge begin to move again and a new burst of energy occurs. Casey notices that the last explosion was 10 hours ago. Immediately after the stone's activity, the pyramid in Java explodes, completely destroying Indonesia. Watching all of this, the general concludes that Stonehenge is responsible, meaning this is a global scale operation. Leeds watches the news and realizes they need to act. She steps outside with the major and asks for his help. Jacob is the only one who proposed a theory that explains everything, so they need to go to New York. Initially, the military man disagrees, but Leeds manages to convince him. They break Jacob out of prison and head to America. At the same time, the general demands that the stone issue be resolved. If they can't handle it, he plans to drop a nuclear bomb on Stonehenge. John dislikes this prospect and decides they need to eliminate the electromagnetic field. Mara suggests using a radio telescope for this purpose. Meanwhile, the major, Casey, and Jacob get into a car and drive off. On the way, the scientist explains everything that has happened. Upon hearing that cyanobacteria have emerged in the soil, the man suggests that Stonehenge is giving rise to a new civilization and transforming Earth into a place suitable for their existence. David learns and informs John that Jacob and Leeds have left. John is angry that no one stopped them, but his attention is drawn to Mara. She is picked up on an interference frequency. After making some adjustments, the scientist orders the research to be halted. The gamma waves have become nuclear. These short waves are turning Stonehenge into a nuclear reactor. Casey, the major, and Jacob arrive at the American Archaeological Fund, where they are greeted and led to the ancient mechanism. However, they don't manage to take it out of its display case before gunfire erupts. Without hesitation, the scientist smashes the glass, grabs the relic, and runs off with Casey. Once outside, he hides it in the car and tells her to stay quiet. While he heads back inside there, he finds the major and his friend Joseph dead. It turns out the shooting was his doing. He too had come for the key. The former friend explains that he found a pyramid underground in Maine, and this mechanism is indeed the key that activates the ancient machine and provides shelter during the apocalypse. With a fanatical gleam in his eyes, Joseph tries to convince the scientist to join him, promising he will witness the birth of a new world. However, Jacob refuses to help him and plans to leave. One of the men strikes him in the face and the doctor loses consciousness. When he regains his senses, he discovers that the mechanism is gone. He goes outside, finds Casey, and tells her that Joseph has stolen the key. The major is dead and someone from the center is spying for the thief. The woman doesn't believe that anyone from her team is capable of this. The scientist also mentions that they need to head to Maine, where an ancient structure has been found and the key works for it too. After analyzing the data, David announces that another big explosion is imminent, and according to the timer, it will happen in 1 minute. As the timer hits 0, Stonehenge releases another powerful burst and the pyramids in Egypt explode. Emergency protocols are immediately declared in the Middle East. John asks Marla to inform the authorities of the countries with pyramids about the need for evacuation. Turning to the general, he agrees to authorize the use of nuclear weapons against Stonehenge. On their way to Maine, Casey calls John and tells him about the key, confirming that Jacob was right all along. Unfortunately, a group of cultists stole the key from them, but they're on their way to retrieve it. Upon hearing from the scientist that he has agreed to deploy the nuclear bomb, Jacob immediately explains that it's a bad idea and asks for help to get to Joseph. They need people in vehicles. John agrees. Meanwhile, in the pyramid, Joseph tells his followers that they are the chosen ones and are destined to see Earth reborn. After his speech, he asks his assistant to lead the people to the shelter, which he will seal afterward using his device. Jacob manages to pick up electromagnetic pulses and using them as a guide. RAC is off in search of Joseph. At that moment, Joseph places the key on the altar, activating the mechanism, and the pyramid rises from the ground. The area around them goes into chaos. The asphalt collapses and the car carrying the scientists barely avoids falling into the chasm. Coming to a stop, they exit the vehicle, and the scientist explains to the police officer that this is the primordial hill. Ancient texts say it will rise from the chaos and provide shelter. Reflecting on Jacob's words, JN tells the general that dropping the nuclear bomb on Stonehenge is not an option. It's likely that the stones will deflect the impact. The military officer is outraged that John has changed his mind, but it's too late to reverse the decision. He orders the evacuation of everyone within a 160 kilometers radius. Everyone involved in the operation quickly packs up their things and leaves the hot zone. Surrounded by 3 police officers, Jacob and Casey cautiously approach the pyramid. Suddenly the shield is torn from the man's hands and sticks to the door. The doctor says the doors are sealed. One of the officers then shoots at them with a grenade launcher, breaking the seal. As soon as it happens, the shield falls to the ground and the doors open. Once inside, Jacob doesn't find Joseph. He rushes back outside, checks his device, and realizes Joseph is in the forest. At the operations center, the timer suggests that a new explosion is imminent, but nothing happens. In the next moment, the central stone begins to glow and rotates 90 degrees. Mara notices that the Earth's energy system is filling up, and once this process is complete, an explosion will occur. The general immediately orders everyone to evacuate the building. Guided by his device, Jacob continues searching for his former friend. Suddenly a gunshot rings out and Casey cries out, clutching her arm. Joseph has shot her in the shoulder. Jacob quickly helps her settle under a tree and ties her wound. Afterward, he heads toward the archaeologist, trying to reason with him. He explains that Stonehenge is a terraforming device left by beings who once inhabited Earth, but the archaeologist believes their civilization was a failed experiment and they need to start over. Pointing a gun at Jacob, Joseph expresses regret that Jacob didn't want to join him. Just then a police officer appears in the forest, distracting the archaeologist. Jacob seizes the opportunity and attacks, and a fight breaks out between them. The scientist doesn't see what's happening, but suddenly she hears a gunshot. Carefully peeking out, she sees the dead archaeologist with Jacob sitting above him, a gun in his hand. After taking the mechanism, they leave. Casey calls John and informs him that they've captured the key, but it needs to be urgently delivered to England. In response, she hears that it's too late. However, Jacob convinces the general to give them more time and delay the nuclear strike. The general agrees, but says he will only help get Jacob to England and won't assist on site. After the deadline, the bomb will be dropped. Hanging up, the scientist's tells Casey that she's going to the hospital. After the call, John, Mara, and David decide to return to the operations center to assist the scientist. If he doesn't succeed, the world is doomed anyway. Before parting ways with Casey, Jacob gives her his pritch medal, telling her to keep it safe until he returns. She promises to hold onto it for him. John, Mara, and David head back to the base with the timer showing they have just 8 hours left. Meanwhile, Jacob arrives in England, is given a car, and is told John is waiting for him at the center. On the news, reports show destruction unfolding worldwide. Suddenly, David shares his thoughts with his colleagues. It turns out he knows Joseph and has been helping him all along. Even though Joseph is dead, David plans to continue his work and will stop Jacob from preventing the terraforming of the planet. The scientists realize he's a traitor and prepare to stop him, but David shoots at them. Seeing that time is running out, the general orders the release of the plane with the nuclear warheads. Jacob drives at maximum speed toward the Stonehenge stones. As he nears the base, he spots David. At that moment, a wounded John appears behind him, shouting at the scientists that the geophysicist is a traitor and that he's armed. In a rage, David kills John and charges after the doctor. The plane is already approaching the target and the pilot requests permission to arm the missile. There are less than 3 minutes remaining on the timer. Jacob races towards Stonehenge with David hot on his tail, trying to kill him. Meanwhile, in the sky, the plane is ready to release the missile. However, the pilot discovers that the targeting system cannot detect the target and decides to drop the bomb the old-fashioned way. Jacob is very close to the stones, but just before reaching them, his car stalls. Leaping out, he starts running toward the target, but David shoots at him, hitting him in the leg. Summoning all his strength, Jacob gets back on his feet and keeps running, but David shoots him again and Jacob collapses next to the central stone. The general is informed that the magnetic interference has disabled the plane's equipment and the pilot is switched to manual release. The general is anxious as they only have 1 minute left and the target has not been struck. In the final seconds, the plane releases the missile. At that moment, Jacob manages to gather his strength and attempts to rise, but David prevents him from doing so and takes the mechanism from him. Looking up at the sky, Jacob sees the bomb hurtling toward the stones and with a heroic effort forces himself to stand. He grabs the traitor's arm and presses the key to the center of the Stone, a blinding blue light engulfs them, shooting into the sky and destroying the nuclear warhead. The light fades and Stonehenge returns to its normal form. News broadcasts report that the earthquakes and volcanic eruptions have stopped, and climatologists state that the atmosphere will be cleared in a few years. In the hospital, Casey sits on her bed flipping through newspapers. In one of them she finds an article about Jacob, that the scientist sacrificed his life to save the planet. Sometime later, Dr. Casey Lead sits in his studio. She has decided to continue the radio show that he once hosted. What would you do if you discovered that Earth was being terraformed? Would you accept it as an unavoidable reality, or would you fight to change it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Give a like and don't forget to subscribe to your Inno Thinks. We will see you tomorrow in our next level movie. Lots of love, guys.